The Glendale Road Church of Christ proudly presents a weekly exploration of the Word of our living God. This is It Is Written with Minister Jason Hart.
Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he did, believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. He'd raised Lazarus from the dead. So the chief priest and the Pharisees gathered the council and said, "What are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And then the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for you that one should die for the people." How strange it was that a man who was bent on killing Jesus actually prophesied of the purposes and plans of God through His Son. That a man who had set his mind and his heart and his agendas on killing the Son of God actually spoke the words of God's amazing grace. That's sort of the summary of the cross of Christ. The irony of the cross. When we find ourselves at the foot of the cross, we find ourselves with an amazing conflict of emotions. Many things that we don't understand, many things that are beyond our complete comprehension. Finding ourselves confused as the idea of the cross of Christ is embedded in our hearts, and as we try to understand it and let it pour into us, it arouses within us emotions of anger, of rage. But then a smile spreads across our face and we find joy and we find love, we find peace and comfort in the very thing that was filled with agony and bitterness and pain. There's no wonder why the cross was an offense. Irony wouldn't even be the word to describe it. It was a place where opposing and conflicting ideas and thoughts and emotions were woven together in the fabric of God's grace. It was a place where hatred and love teamed together. It was the place where the purposes and plans of the greatest enemies ever arrived to the same destination. It was the place where the oil of God's gladness and the bitter waters of sin actually mixed together and came up with a formula where conviction and compromise were woven together. To think about the cross of Christ leaves one absolutely confused. It's meant to be simple. but yet it is in its simplicity that God is able to place within us a heart of wanting to understand, and through our desire to understand, it convicts us. We have a major question this morning to ask. Do you need Jesus to have died on the cross? I would imagine that for most individuals here, we have enough information, enough understanding about sin and about its consequences that we would absolutely answer this question in the positive. There's no doubt about it. I need Jesus to have died on the cross. You need Jesus to have died on the cross. We are lost without the cross. We are hopeless without the cross. We are cursed without the cross. We are nothing without the cross. No matter how high you may think of yourself, no matter how great you may think yourself to be, without the cross of Christ, you are nothing. We need the cross of Jesus Christ. But yet I ask you this morning to think about this question. I want you to be conflicted in your hearts and in your mind, because it is within that conflict that God can create a conviction like no other. So ask yourself this question: do you need Jesus to have died on the cross? Friends, that's a very serious question. I want you to consider the irony of the cross. And as I said before, I don't think irony is really the most appropriate word. I don't think there is a word to describe this. I think, first of all, the moral perspective of the cross. Is there any single one of us that would look back at the cross of Christ and say that Jesus deserved that? From our perspective, the idea of a man being unjustly accused in an unrighteous system of law, held guilty and convicted and then executed of no real crime whatsoever, we would think that was hideous, repulsive. We wouldn't even imagine it. Why, from our perspective, had we been there in Jesus' day, we would have looked upon that day and walked around with little picket signs. Don't do this. You can't shed this man's blood. But yet we need Jesus to die on the cross. There was a time when Jesus looked over to His disciples. He said He must go into Jerusalem and suffer at the hands of men. And Peter stepped in. Now, sometimes we give Peter a hard time about this, and had Jesus never said anything against him, we probably would have thought, way to go, Peter. That's a good job, Peter. Peter said, be it far from you, Lord. I forbid it. No, don't go to Jerusalem, because they're going to kill you there. But yet Jesus looks over at Peter and says, you are Satan. You're thinking by the ways of man, not by the ways of God. You are becoming my adversary. Jesus needs to go to the cross. Consider the hateful cries. Do you need Jesus to have gone to the cross? As Jesus was placed on a platform Pilate looks out at the people and said, "What must I do then with Jesus who is called Christ?" And the cry that comes forth out of the crowd is, "Crucify Him! Crucify Him! Crucify Him!" And can we look back at that day and place ourselves in the scene and think of ourselves and our condition and tell them, "Shh, be quiet, we don't want Jesus to go to the cross. We need Jesus to go to the cross. We need the crowd to shout out, 'Crucify Him, crucify Him, crucify the Son of God.'" The ruthless treatment that He received in the Jewish court, being mocked and being spit upon and being beaten, be taken over into the hall of the soldiers, and there to be scourged and His back torn to complete shreds, then clothed with a scarlet robe and a crown of thorns placed upon His head, with men bowing down in complete mockery, saying, "Hail, Jesus, the King of the Jews," or for a sign to be placed above Him, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." The ruthless treatment that was against Him. Yet we need Jesus to have died upon the cross. The most unimaginable, unthinkable, unbelievable thing that we could ever think could happen to the Son of God, we needed to happen to Him. So tell me, do you need Jesus to have died on the cross? Paul called it an offense. It's a stumbling block. It's confusing. It's a scandal. It's a trap. It's a snare, the Jews thought. It's a con. In one way, we look at the cross, and from that perspective, we see the grace, we see the love, we see the joy. But from another perspective, we see it as nothing but a curse. Jesus became a curse so that we would be redeemed from the curse of the law. In Deuteronomy chapter 21, quoted in Galatians chapter 3 and verse 13, says that anybody who dies on a tree, that is a curse. Yet we need Jesus to become a curse. We need Him to have died upon the cross. Do you need Jesus to have died upon the cross? We look back into the Old Testament and we see a number of prophecies that were about Jesus. And every single one of these, Jesus knew Himself. We look in Isaiah chapter 53. This is what Jesus would expect. He would expect to be despised, rejected, smitten, afflicted, pierced, crushed, scourged. When you look in Isaiah or Psalm chapter 122, He was abused, He was mocked, He was weakened. As He was dying on the cross, one of the things that He says before the people, "I thirst." His mouth had become wood. He was dehydrated. At first He refused anything to drink because He needed to keep His senses. He needed to be able to think. He didn't need to be outside of His mind. He needed His mind to be in complete authority over Himself. Yet He thirsted. He needed the wetness on His mouth to be able to say some of the greatest words ever spoken by any man. He was surrounded by enemies. His hands and His feet were pierced. And even lots were cast over His garments. Roman soldiers at the foot of the cross casting lots for the fabric that He had worn. Isaiah chapter 50 and verse 6 tells us He was scourged, He was hit, He was spit upon. Isaiah chapter 52 and verse 14 tells us that He was marred more than any man that has ever lived or who would ever live. He was disfigured beyond anything that is even imaginable. So answer the question, do you need Jesus to have died upon the cross? Think deep within and try to reach in and pull out your moral sensitivities. Do you need Jesus to have died on the cross? As Jesus was anticipating the cross, as it would come upon Him in short order, He found Himself in the Garden of Gethsemane. There He left His disciples, took Peter and James and John with Him further into the garden, and there He knelt down and prayed unto God. And in that prayer, as He was offering it up unto God, He was there, His soul was sorrowed, He was in great distress as He described it to His fellow friends. He prays to God, asking, just let this cup pass from me. He was filled with so much emotion, such bitter agony, knowing exactly what was ahead of Him, what had been planned for Him, what was being purposed through this. Yet He found Himself on His knees praying, let this cup pass from me. Let the pouring out of Your wrath be taken away from my shoulders. And He prayed it with such agony that He sweated as if it were great drops of blood. T.W. Hunt, in a series of video lessons called The Mind of Christ, tells us that there is actually a condition, I believe it was called hematidrosis. We're under great amounts of stress. The capillaries actually burst. And the only way for the blood to escape is to escape through the sweat glands. Then while doing it causes a great sensitivity to the skin. 3 times Jesus went into the garden. 3 times He went down upon His knees. 3 times He utters the words, nevertheless, not my will, but Yours be done. I know that all things are possible. Let this cup pass from me, but Your will be done. 3 times He goes into the garden, and 3 times He comes out and He finds His disciples asleep. Their eyes being so weary. Their hearts in stress and in weeping. They find themselves tired. But Jesus finds them asleep. Do you need Jesus to have died on the cross? He was betrayed by a friend. He was denied by an apostle. 3 times, and even upon the 3rd denial, looks at Him in His face. Taken into the courts of the high priest, He's called a blasphemer. They began to dance around Him, mocking Him and hitting Him and spitting upon Him. Treating one of their own as if He is nothing but a dog. These days, dogs are shown a whole lot better treatment. He's held in comparison to a murderer. Up on a platform, Pilate brings out a man by the name of Barabbas. Barabbas was an insurrectionist and he was a murderer. Pilate's thought was he would be able to release Jesus. He was trying to appeal to the Jews' sense of morality. Which one would you have that I release unto you? Would you release Barabbas? Here is a murderer. Here is a rebel. Would you release him, or would you release Jesus? And they called for Barabbas. Which one would you want to set free? I know that you would want to set free Jesus, but we need Jesus to go to the cross. Jesus was mocked in the delight of the soldiers. He was mocked by those standing at the cross. So if you're the Son of the God, come down from the cross. You saved others, but you cannot save yourselves. Two thieves on either side railing on Him and hissing at Him. So beaten and so tattered and so weakened by the scourging that He couldn't even carry His own cross. The shame, the shame, the shame of the cross. Do you need Jesus to have died on the cross? The cries came out from the crowds as Jesus was above them. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross. Save yourself. Save us. The words coming by one of the thieves, not the one who wanted to be with Him in paradise, but the one who in his dying breath was mocking Him. If you can do a trick, why don't you do it now? If you can do a miracle, why don't you do it now? But oh, how he did not know that Jesus, as He was hanging on the cross, all He had to do was look up. All He had to do was say, I'm done with it. I can't handle this anymore. Send your angels. Destroy the world. Make Golgotha a hole in the ground. He could have done that. And I would imagine there is a part of us deep down inside that wants to say, Jesus, call on your angels. It's not worth it for God to be treated like this. It's beyond my comprehension. But yet, I need Jesus to hang there in bitter agony. To painfully hear those words that were given to Him in mockery and derision. I need Him to be able to look down upon His mother and tell her, I'm going away, you need somebody to care for you. I need that woman to be in complete agony because she's looking up at her son hanging on that cross. I need Jesus to feel forsaken. For His friends to deny Him, for His friends to be ashamed of Him, for them to run away. I need Jesus to be there on the cross alone. I need Him to utter the words, my God, why have you forsaken me? I need Jesus to say those words, I thirst. Of all of the words physically that He probably had the hardest time to say, I thirst. Because I needed Him to say the words that were most important. Tell me, do you need Jesus to have died on the cross? He hung there on the cross because of our sins. He bore our sins upon the cross. We speak of the agony, the persecution, the bitterness, the pain. We read about the different medical reports and everything that was happening to Jesus' body physically. The agony of the cross was also its glory, as Jesus recited those words that were most important to us. I need Jesus to have said the words, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. I am deserving of the wrath of God against sin. I am deserving of the wrath of God against the sins that have placed Him upon the tree. I need Jesus to say the words, into your hands I commit my spirit. I need Jesus to say the words, it is finished. He must say those words. It is finished. He has to say those words. It is finished. It's completed. It's done with. The sins of the world have been encapsulated in the love and the grace of God. It is finished. Do you need Jesus to have died on the cross? That's a very conflicting question, isn't it? For me to say that I need Jesus to die on the cross is for me to say, crucify Him. It's for me to say, release Barabbas and take Jesus. For me to say that I need Jesus to die on the cross is for me to look at Jesus and say, you cannot save yourself. It's a conflict of misery right here in the depths of my heart. That, to be quite honest with you, I'm not sure exactly how to express. I don't know that there are words to be able to say it. The only thing that I know what to say is that I need Jesus to die on the cross for me. If you need Jesus to have died on the cross for you, why not die for Him? Come forward while we stand and sing.
This has been It Is Written, presented by the Glendale Road Church of Christ. We welcome your visits and communications at any time.
Resound with God's own heart. Oh, let the ancient word